Yeah, you bring up Martin Luther King. I'm glad you did because, as I'm looking at everything that's kind of happening, there seems to be some similarities to the turmoil of the 1960s and 70s. We had civil rights leaders assassinated. We had a president who was assassinated, his brother, a war that was very unpopular, people forced into a draft, protests that were absolutely insane, double-digit inflation in the 1970s, oil embargo. I mean, it was the peak of domestic terrorism, I believe, example being like the Weather Underground, who actually bombed a federal building, if I'm not mistaken. So similar in the turmoil, but it seems very different. What are the differences between now, what's happening now, and in the 1960s and 70s?
Yeah, as you rehearse all that, Sal, I was thinking, I lived through all that. I was a kid. When King was killed in 1968, I was 8 years old. But I remember vividly his assassination, Robert Kennedy's in also 68. I remember all the things you've been describing throughout the 1970s. Yeah, in terms of the turmoil and kind of social upheaval, but I'd say here's the major difference. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s was led almost exclusively by deeply religious people, King being the most famous. I mean, he's a Christian minister, but the top leadership in that movement was largely religious people. And they brought together, I think, very cleverly and very effectively, the ideals of the Bible. So think here of King invoking Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos and Hosea. He invokes the great prophetic tradition of Israel, right, that speaks out on behalf of the poor and behalf of the oppressed. They link that together with the great American tradition, which is grounded in what you called correctly classical liberalism. So when King stands on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, and he invokes the Hebrew prophets, and he also invokes, Jefferson and the Declaration and Abraham Lincoln to bring the American vision. I like that. I thought that was tremendous how he brought those two traditions together. I don't see either one of those in the woke movement today, and that's what bugs me about it. Now, before I say any more about that, I'll say something very positive about it. The deep concern for people who are oppressed, the deep concern to right wrongs, to address injustice, I'm all for it. That's right out of the Bible. The Bible gave to Western culture, especially, but to the whole world, but it gave to Western culture this deep sense of identification with the poor and the oppressed, and reaching its culmination in this crucified criminal dying on an instrument of torture outside of Jerusalem. So the fact that the crucified Jesus is at the heart of our Western civilization, that's where our concern for the victim comes from. So to that, I say, hooray, I say terrific. The problem is the woke people, notice, first of all, the lack of religious leadership. The movement today is not led by religious people because there's often a hostility between the woke philosophy and religion. That, to me, is a tragedy. I'd be so much happier if we could find that space again that Martin Luther King found, where classical liberalism meets the Bible in a societal transformation. So that's why I prefer that 50s, 60s style to what we have now.